Hello, and welcome to Nightmare Masterclass. My name is David Stockdale. I'll be your host on this excursion into the dark unknown. Thank you for joining me tonight. So, I know that I'm a bit late to the game with my take on Rise of Skywalker, but I figured I would offer a quick assessment of the movie for the purpose of framing my upcoming argument, which is that David Lynch should direct a Star Wars movie. That's a bold take, I know. I have my reasons. We'll get to them in due time. So, Rise of Skywalker. Let's talk about it. I have loved Star Wars since I was a kid. I had the original trilogy on VHS, and I'm still kicking myself for losing track of it. I also had this really cool Star Wars encyclopedia with all of the expanded universe stuff in there. Did anyone else have one of those? At any rate, there are my fanboy bona fides, and in my view, The Rise of Skywalker was a major letdown. I say this as someone whose expectations have been greatly mitigated by the quality of the prequel trilogy, which, listen, if you're a prequel apologist, more power to you. Whatever floats your boat. I would say they're poorly made films, but I do tend to think the basic story arc, the fall of democracy, that was good. I kind of have the opposite issue with the sequel trilogy, more specifically the stuff J.J. Abrams has done. There are a few select moments in Rise of Skywalker that I enjoyed. For instance, I liked when the Resistance was mounting its last stand against Palpatine's fleet, and a bunch of ships from all across the galaxy came to assist them. There's one memorable line when a First Order crew member says, "It's not a navy, sir, it's just people." I love that. The original Star Wars was about a ragtag bunch of rebels mounting a last-ditch effort to stop an oppressive authoritarian regime. So it makes sense in this film that average, everyday people all across the galaxy would take part in this ongoing struggle. I wish that moment was not couched in such a god-awful mess of a film. In general, Rise of Skywalker was extremely choppy, and the pacing was all over the place. I won't focus on that too much because I'd just be echoing some very common complaints. What I will focus on is the writing, because that is really where the film's weakness lies. This movie felt so totally inauthentic that it sometimes had the quality of a child playing with their action figures in the backyard. Like, oh no, Chewie's dead. Psych, now he's alive. And I thought it was really quite lazy to bring back Palpatine. More to the point, it was totally unnecessary to have Rey be his granddaughter. It's a shame too, because I think the general point this film is trying to express is good. Like, your identity is what you make of it, I suppose. And I could go either way on Ben Solo's redemption arc. If properly executed, I think it would be in line with the general themes that Star Wars has exhibited. But also, we've already seen that, and Rise of Skywalker is just too poorly done for me to say that I enjoyed this storyline. If Disney wants to keep churning this shit out, that's fine. It's to be expected. The Star Wars franchise is basically a money-printing operation for them at this point. I'm painfully aware of that, and I've accepted it. I know this all sounds really cynical, but allow me to put it in Star Wars terms for you. The executives at Disney could never really hope to capture what Star Wars is really about because, well, Disney is kind of like the Empire. They're a corporate behemoth that controls way too much of this market. I would even go so far as to say they're something akin to a monopoly, and perhaps they need to be dismantled. This type of corporate concentration in the film industry leads to bland, unremarkable films. The original Star Wars was a labor of love, and now that the franchise is in the hands of Disney, well, like I said, they're just going to keep churning them out. It's a franchise that is virtually guaranteed to make money for them in the long term. But it's a shame because there are so many possibilities here. Why not let Sofia Coppola direct a Star Wars movie about some drama going on with the royal line of Naboo? Let Nicolas Windin Refn direct a neo-noir movie set on Coruscant. Let Boots Riley direct a Star Wars movie about the transition of power to the Empire on Tatooine from the perspective of the Tusken Raiders. I'm just spitballing here. What's Edgar Wright up to these days? Let Todd Solondz direct a Star Wars movie about some weird, silly shit going on at the Mos Eisley Cantina. How about the Safdie brothers? Dude, let Jordan Peele direct a horror movie set in the Star Wars universe. I'm not sure if he'd agree to do it, but I'd watch the fuck out of that. But really, above all else, I want to see a Star Wars movie directed by David Lynch. It's important to note that Lynch was offered the director's chair for Return of the Jedi. He somewhat famously turned it down, citing lack of interest in the project. He said, and I quote, "I went to meet George Lucas, who had offered me the third Star Wars movie to direct, and I've never really even liked science fiction. I like elements of it, but it needs to be combined with other genres. And obviously, Star Wars was totally George's thing. So it's fairly clear that David Lynch has absolutely no interest in being involved with the Star Wars franchise. Fair enough, but see, here's the thing. Lynch may not have needed Star Wars, however, the franchise desperately needs a director like David Lynch, and it has for a long time. It's pertinent to ask, why did George Lucas think that David Lynch was a potential choice to direct Return of the Jedi, the conclusion of his original trilogy? Was it just because he was a hot director at the time? I don't think so. Now, Lynch's position aside, I do think there's a well-founded reason Lucas thought that Lynch was a viable candidate at the time. It's because David Lynch intuitively understands the Force. There are a few scenes in the original trilogy that are vaguely Lynchian. For instance, there's a scene on Dagobah in which Luke Skywalker is confronted by Darth Vader. In a fantastical slow-motion fight, Luke strikes Vader down only to discover that he was fighting himself. The scene expresses Luke's struggle with the darkness inside of him. Luke's inner struggle is the central theme of the original trilogy. Above all, the scene relays to the audience that darkness exists even within our Golden Boy protagonist, the kid who used to bullseye womp rats in his T-16 back on Tatooine. It is clear by the end of the original trilogy that Luke is dynamic and three-dimensional. He's capable of both good and evil. And this tension is part of what makes the original trilogy great. These films aren't really about epic space battles, weird alien creatures, or dudes with laser swords. All of these elements simply facilitate the thing this trilogy is really about, the inherent capacity within everyone for both good and evil. Of course, Lynch has been exploring variations of this theme his entire career, and he's done so in a considerably more creative fashion than any of the directors in the Star Wars series, including Lucas himself. Lynch tends to have a more nuanced approach to the whole good and evil thing, which I think Star Wars could use more of. His characters are always navigating some kind of morally ambiguous terrain. Another element of Lynch's work that I think makes him well suited to the task of directing a Star Wars movie is his emphasis on the destructive capacity of war. Specifically, I'm thinking of Twin Peaks Season 3, Episode 8, God of Light, which, if you haven't seen, you're going to want to watch prior to listening to me yammer about it. Frankly, it's one of the best hours of television in history. In fact, if you haven't seen Twin Peaks, just go watch it right now. That takes precedence over my little spiel. At any rate, the episode depicts an atomic bomb going off in 1945 at a test site in New Mexico, and it is casually revealed that something evil has been unleashed on the world by virtue of this bomb's detonation. Twin Peaks merits an in-depth analysis of its own, and in particular, I think the significance of this atom bomb in the series needs to be discussed. Take note that FBI Director Gordon Cole, played by none other than David Lynch himself, actually has a framed picture of an atom bomb detonation in his office. The point is, there is a kind of spiritual heaviness in Lynch's work that is connected to war, and perhaps to a broader extent, modernity. These are themes that the original Star Wars trilogy explored as well, specifically in relation to the Death Star. Now, for the record, I don't think Disney would seriously consider letting someone like David Lynch direct a Star Wars movie, even if he wanted to, because they're clearly averse to even minor risks. I mean, they were even too cowardly to let a gay relationship be the highlight of the last movie. In the words of Lynch himself, "Fix your hearts or die." And Disney certainly wouldn't give Lynch final cut, which is a deal breaker for him, and rightfully so. The point is, I know I'm just screaming into the abyss here, But a man can dream, can't he? You know, I could talk about whatever I want on this channel, and I want to live in a universe where David Lynch is directing a Star Wars movie. That's my truth. I'm living my truth.
David Lynch should direct a Star Wars movie. I really think that David Lynch should direct a Star Wars movie. Yeah. I have no time for prequel apologists. The prequels were very bad movies. I would also like to see a weird Star Wars movie by Todd Solondz. David Lynch, he should direct a Star Wars movie. Yeah. David Lynch, I really think he should direct a Star Wars movie. Okay. I'd like to reiterate here that David Lynch should direct a Star Wars movie.